Good morning. I'm Jerry Price. I'd like to welcome you to Journey into Life and Work, our weekly Bible study brought to you by our Sunday School department here at First Baptist Church. Privileged to come into your home this morning, excuse me, and to share God's Word with you. We're continuing in the book of Genesis, and we've been in this thing, I guess, for about a good bit now. It's into about our 16th week into the book of Genesis, and we've been dealing with Abraham here recently. And, he was called to be father of nations from the Lord had proclaimed that to him, and he was given a wife by the name of Sarah. And, of course, Sarah was, as you remember, was barren. Abraham and Sarah was promised a son, and after about 90 years or 100 years for Abraham, they were blessed with Isaac. And so we dealt with Isaac a little bit in his birth, and then I think at about the age of 15, we speculate somewhere along in there, Abraham and Isaac traveled up to the mountaintop, and there Abraham presented Isaac as a sacrifice to the Lord, and the Lord took care of that and provided a ram in the bushes there, in the bush, and the lamb became the sacrifice, and then the story continues on. And so we figured that Isaac was about 15 when the sacrifice was taking place, and now Isaac is roughly 40 years old, and Abraham, we speculate, is somewhere in maybe the 170s, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think he died around age of 175, maybe 180 when he died. And anyway, so Abraham realizes, and he's been following God's plan all along, and we've seen God's plan unfold as he continues to call these people to be the father of nations, to multiply on the earth and to fill the earth and to be leaders and in honoring God. And so in order to do this, they have to continue to have children. And Abraham and Sarah didn't have any children, and he knew that in order for his bloodline to continue to be who God wanted him to be, that he was going to have a son. And so now, after he's had Isaac, Isaac is roughly 40 years old, and Abraham's realizing, well, God, in order to continue this bloodline, Isaac's going to have some children. And in order to do that, he has to get married and have a wife. And so we looked at, last week, we looked at Rebekah and how God initiated that plan and brought that plan all the way through and presented Isaac with a wife of Rebekah. Sarah had died at this time, and so Rebekah actually becomes the patriarch, the woman patriarch, that the line and lineage would continue through. And so here they are, I guess Isaac and Rebekah are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of, I'm going to say, around 60 years old now. And Rebekah is barren. She cannot have any children. And of course from that, instead of God coming and telling them that he would give them a son, Isaac prayed to God and asked that God would open up her womb and allow her to become pregnant, and she does that with twins. And so this is where we are today in this lesson. God's covenant was to continue, like I said, through Isaac. The Lord promised Isaac that he would also make his offspring as numerous as the stars in the sky, and you can remember that from his promise to Abraham. Of course, like I said, in the 20 years of marriage now, around the age of 60, Isaac's wife Rebekah had been unable to conceive, and unlike his father, who sought to have a child through Sarah's servant, Abraham and Sarah took their own way to have an heir to Isaac and through Hagar, but instead Isaac prayed that his wife might have a child, and she did become pregnant. And so anyway, she was having twins. Said that she noticed she was having an unusually active pregnancy. Well, I guess with twins that could be understood, but anyway, she prayed about it, and God told her that there are two nations in your womb. Two people will come from you and be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the other will serve the older will serve the younger. And so with the birth of the twin sons, there was contention and there was conflict between the norm and Isaac's family. And it started out with the boy's birth. Excuse me. Esau was born first, and he sort of had a reddish appearance, they said, and he was covered with hair. And the name Esau was a reference to his hairiness. Then Jacob was the second son, and he came out grasping on to the heel of Esau. And so they say that in ancient cultures he was called a heel catcher, and that was dishonorable, but it conveyed the idea of being a trickster, a deceiver, or a scoundrel. And so the name Jacob means that he grasps the heel, or supplanter, meaning the one who replaces or kicks his way through. And so the story goes, there was contention between the two sons, and it continued when they grew older. And the first was between the twins and the birthright. And of course, receiving the birthright typically went to the oldest son, and that was a larger share of the father's estate, and the oldest was typically the beneficiary of that. And but anyway, there was a lot of circumstances there, unusual circumstances, and where the birthright went to another son. But the reason for the larger inheritance was that the older son typically assumed the role of leader in the family, and he was ultimately responsible for the surviving extended family, including the mother and any unwedded sisters that he may have. Anyway, Esau was the intended recipient until he came home famished after a day of hunting. And Esau was an outdoorsman, and he liked to hunt and deal with game and all of this. But anyway, Jacob favors staying close to the hearth and home. And so one day, Jacob had cooked up a stew while Esau was out hunting, and the older brother arrived home, and he was hungry, and so he asked for some stew. And so at this time, seizing the opportunity, Jacob told him, he said, well, you can have some stew, but I want your birthright for it. And so anyway, Esau agreed. I guess didn't really understand what he was agreeing to, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, he was that hungry that he wanted some of the stew. It must have been really good, I guess. So anyway, the second issue of contention was their father's blessing, which was given to Esau, the eldest son. As Isaac grew old, so much so that he couldn't see as well, and the thought, like I said, his time was drawing of death was getting close. And anyway, but he summoned Esau to give Esau the blessing. And before he did so, he told his son to hunt some game so that Isaac could have a delicious meal prior to giving him that blessing. Well, this is where the mother steps in, and she overhears all this, and so she devises a plan that would trick Isaac into giving him the blessing for Jacob. And so she gave Jacob the meal and sent him to the father to gain the blessing. And so this is where all the story takes place today. We see the trap and the deceiver and everything that takes place here. So with the preparations and disguise in place, with the help of his mother, Jacob approached the father, and the story goes here. So Teresa, let's look at the trap and see how it was set as we go to here.
Okay, Jerry has just delivered my part beautifully. And I'm going to be repeating, I'm sure, but the trap, yeah. And he makes a comment here that we could bring a mouse trap to Sunday school and show it to our students and say there are a lot of different kinds of traps, but this was a trap. And Rebecca, the mom, helped to do this. So anyway, let's read 18, 19, and 20, and this is Genesis 27. When he came to his father, he said, and of course this is Jacob, he said, "My father?" And Isaac answered, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob replied to his father, "I'm Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me." And of course he's talking about going to prepare the stew. "Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How did you ever find it so quickly, my son?" And Jacob replied, "Because the Lord your God made it happen for me." Okay, of course the title of the lesson is The Deceiver. And it's always struck me that Jacob received so many blessings from God and had so many responsibilities with our faith. And I kept thinking, he did so many bad things. And then you turn around and you look at yourself and you say, I sin every day, yet God forgives me when I ask. And that forgiveness is through the blood of Jesus. So there's forgiveness, and God has mercy, and he has forgiveness, and he has judgment, and he covers the whole spectrum. But Jacob was a little booger, and his mama helped him be that. But God took that and turned it into his plan, because God had a plan before any of it happened, and he allowed it to happen. And so his plan was fulfilled through Jacob a great deal. When he talked about father, and this is, of course, really interesting to me, because Abram means exalted father, and Abraham means father of a multitude. And they refer to Abba. And, of course, my precious husband's name was Ab. And we received, during the nearly 40 years we were married, we received all sorts of communications for Abraham, because they thought there was some kind of a typographical, if I say that right, anyway, error. And they thought that his name was Abraham, and we just called him Ab for short. But his name was ABB, Ab. And when our first grandchild was born, she immediately, and she talked very early, she immediately started calling him Abba. And nobody ever told her to. We didn't think that would be a wonderful name, and so it was a blessing in our family. And I'm so glad that we were able to follow fathers of the Bible, because Ab certainly was. But Jerry talked about the importance of the father in the family, and he did. He had, and you see such a difference in our families today. The fathers of that day had all the responsibility of the religious teaching. They had the responsibility of the moral training. And I mean, this was totally on the father. He did all of this. He even, took care of getting the daughters married, choosing a husband for them. He had so many responsibilities, and the fathers carried these things out. I'm afraid that we've fallen a long way from that in our day, because you'll see more mothers bring their children to church than you do fathers. And I don't know, it's a sad thing, but the father needs to be the head of the family. So anyway, that's the way God started it. That's the way he intended it to be. Fathers passed on ancient traditions, and of course, there was so little that was written. There were so many things that had to be done by oral tradition. You had to tell orally what it was, because you had so few things written down. And that's the way it passed from generation to generation. So, anyway, let's see. Let's actually follow the lesson here. We talked about Esau, and Jerry told you that he was the older twin. and that Jacob was born holding Esau's heel. He wanted to push Esau back and be born first. But God knew all this too. He knew that he was the deceiver even in the womb. He was trying to be first. But Esau was hairy and apparently had a really red complexion, which a lot of redheads do. And it was sort of, telling about what Jacob did, holding his heel, Esau's heel, that was the way it was going to be in life, and certainly that's the way it turned out. And we see Isaac favoring Esau and Rebekah favoring Jacob. That's never a good idea in a family, for one parent to favor one child and to let them know that. That's a sad thing, and apparently these kids knew it. But look at what Jacob did. He did exactly the same thing in his life. When he has started to have these sons, we know that the last two sons born by his favorite wife were the favorite in his eyes, and it caused trouble in the family. But again, we see that God turned that trouble into his plan and made it be a blessing. Okay, and he pointed out the difference, and Jerry probably mentioned this, but this was interesting to me, that the blessing was different from the birthright. The birthright entitled a son to a portion of the possessions, and I mean it was they were material things, while the blessing was more words. It was more, I bless you to do this, I bless you to carry on this, and the traditions, and to lead and guide your family, and to do that. So there was quite a difference. Remember, in the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, God preserved the eldest of each family, while all of the Egyptians, the eldest in the family died. And even the animals, the firstborn animals were taken in that particular, what was it called, Jerry? The 10 plagues in that plague. So, did I say that right?
You did.
Okay, thank you. I hope that you will tell me if I don't. But Jacob's a colorful character, and we look at him and we can see a lot of human characteristics in the things that he did. They were, not quite kosher. But we also see that God used Jacob in a great way, and Jacob allowed himself to be used.
Well, Teresa, today as we look at families and family life, we see some of this today, even going on in today's where there are favoritisms between parents and anyway. I don't know so much about the blessings and everything. It looks like everything in an inheritance way today is pretty much divided out for the most part throughout the family, instead of it being given to the oldest to distribute or to have that type of responsibility. But anyway, a lot of times the oldest person in the family, whether male or female, child, takes care of the family a lot of times after their loved ones have passed on. But anyway, we saw that the trap was set there, and now we see the deception and how it's carried out. They put the plan in place. Rebekah had devised the plan, and she had already told this to Jacob of how they would go about and do it. Jacob had a lot of questions about it. If you remember back in the story, he asked his mother, how is this going to come about? I'm not hairy like my brother. I can't deceive my father. He's not going to fall for this. And so anyway, she had a plan where she could kill the goat and put the goat hair on his arms and make him wear his brother's clothes. She really had thought this thing out. But if she had killed Isaac, it would have been premeditated murder, I guess. Anyway, but so we're going to look at verses 21 through 27 and talk about those quickly. And anyway, Isaac had been involved as his sons grew into manhood. Their physical features and mannerisms were seared in his memory, and he knew each one of them by their little their little things that they did and the way that they smelled and their touch and everything. But anyway, his eyesight was gone, and so now he was going to have to depend on his other senses to know who was before him. And unfortunately, Isaac's other senses were still strong. What was evidently growing even stronger, though, was his suspicion. He didn't really believe, because he asked this, I think, like 3 times, are you my son? Are you my son? I can't believe this. But anyway, verse 21 says, then Isaac said to Jacob, please come closer so I can touch you. My son, are you really my son or not? And so, again, the repetition here is important, and repeating a sound or a word or phrase can highlight a positive thought or heighten tension and suspense. And so at the opening of this account, Isaac referred to Esau as my son. And after Esau returned from his hunting trip and he and his father realized what Jacob had done, Isaac asked, what then can I do for you, my son? In other words, so these 2 uses of my son stand like bookends, each spoken in truth. All other occurrences of my son and here were directed at Jacob, and who accepted the title deceitfully. But, the first time Isaac used the phrase when talking to Jacob, he asked him, said, who are you, my son? And of course, probably nervous. Can you imagine Jacob there and having to lie to his father? I mean, right there. I mean, and he's like, well, you think he could really see a little bit better than he's been letting on, whatever. But anyway, Jacob over-answered, highlighting his supposed identity. He said, I'm your firstborn, and claiming that he had obeyed Isaac, and I've done as you've told me. And, he wanted to know whether the one standing before him was really Esau or not. And so, anyway, Isaac told him, he said, come closer. And, each time the sense of tension and dread was building up in Jacob because he knew he might be found out by his father. It doesn't say where Rebecca was during all of this conversation, so I just wonder about her, as well. I mean, is she standing there with Jacob sort of pushing him on and saying, come on, or but anyway, Isaac probably would have known that she was in the room anyway. But anyway, Isaac having to repeat the request indicated Jacob was trying to keep as much distance between them as possible. He didn't want to get too close. Verse 22 and 23 says, so Jacob came closer to his father Isaac, and when he touched him, he said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he blessed him. So Jacob obeyed his father's commands to come closer, and when he touched Jacob, the father was confused, and he was uncertain, and so anyway, like I mentioned earlier, she had dressed him in Esau's clothes, his mother had, and so she had disguised him with hair and all of these other different things, but she forgot to tell him to disguise his voice, to try to sound like Esau. So the voice of is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And so again, Isaac was still sharp, and so what his ears had heard, his fingers had convinced him that the hairiness on his arms was Esau. So he was sort of confused. So Isaac didn't actually bless Jacob at that time. The likely meaning of so he blessed him, was that this experience of touching the hairy hands, what was allowed Isaac to begin the process of blessing his son. And so that all come along with the consumption of the meal that he was partaking of, that Esau had prepared for him, or Jacob in deceit, and the kissing of the son, and then of course the blessing itself. So verse 24 says, again he asked, are you really my son Esau? And he replied, I am. And so sort of perplexed for the third and the final time, Isaac asked again. Jacob's voice didn't sound like Esau's, and that could have been something that would have caused the whole roost to sort of fall apart, But Jacob apparently decided to keep talking to a minimum. And Isaac asked if he was really Jacob, really Esau, and he said, I am, real quick like. And so anyway, verse 25 said, then he said, bring it closer to me, and let me eat some of my son's game so that I can bless you. And Jacob brought it closer to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And so Since the first conversation with Rebekah, Jacob knew he would eventually have to present the meal to his father, and so there was still that tension that was arising there. And Isaac told him, he said, bring it closer to me. I'm still a little suspicious, in his mind, so bring it closer to me. And so then he was speaking to Esau, and Isaac's request, he said, I want some of my son's game. Bring it to me. I often wondered, they said that she killed a goat and prepared the stew. I've eaten, had venison before and wild game, and those two don't taste a lot alike, I don't think. But anyway, Isaac was expecting a meal of wild game that Esau had hunted and killed, but when he got what he got was the goat meat that Rebekah had prepared and cooked, and so they said maybe the wine had sort of dulled his senses a little bit, and so he couldn't tell the difference between the goat meat and the other meat that would have been from Isaac. But anyway, Jacob, of course, he was the trickster, he was the deceiver, and he was a scoundrel, and of course he was living up to his name. Verses 26 and 27 said, Then his father Isaac said to him, Please come closer and kiss me, my son. So he came closer and kissed him, and when Isaac smelled his clothes, he blessed him and said, The smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Have you ever had your kids, or you've been outside for a long period of time and come in and you sort of smell like the outside? I can think of situations like that before, so I guess that's what Isaac was smelling here. He had consumed the meal now, and he told Jacob to come closer, and so here goes the expression of love. The kiss, was a part of the ritual. It was, an expression of the father and the son and the affection that he had for him, and so this was the final test, they said, in order to prove that he was not being deceived and that this was definitely his son. And so, he would have known what his son smelled like, especially if he had just returned from outside or maybe hunting. And so Jacob's word had not fully convinced his father that the one in his presence was his eldest son. Esau neither had the food or the hairy hands and the rough-skinned neck, nor his giving credit to God. And so what made the difference was the smell of the clothes here that he wore. That's what clinched the deal for him. You smell like my son, and you smell like the field, and so I'm going to proceed with the blessing. And so the father's nose had convinced him of what his eyes and what his ears and his fingers had not, but he was convinced that this was his oldest son, Esau. And so being convinced, he was ready to pass the blessing to his son. So, Teresa, let's look at 28 and 30 and see that the blessing was granted.
Okay. I have had a goat.
Yeah.
It was grilled. They did it over a spit. Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
It
used to have goat barbecue.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, I don't remember that. And I don't remember a lot about that grilled goat because I was just a child, but I do remember that it was good. I didn't.
Real quickly. Biddy's barbecue, long time ago.
Biddy,
yeah. Biddy's barbecue.
She had goat.
She served barbecue.
I remember Biddy.
Okay.
Yes.
Goat barbecues.
Okay, goat. Well, I totally missed that. I didn't go at the right time.
But
I do.
B&F Grill.
Gotcha. Okay, so these verses are Isaac's blessing to Jacob. And Jerry mentioned that Isaac just kept questioning. He was suspicious. But I think it showed how sharp he was in many different things except his sight. And I cannot remember, and I thought about it on the way here, so I didn't look it up. There was a Bible character that they talked about that in the scripture. It says he was very sharp. His eyesight was still good, and it talked about his other senses that were still good. That was either Moses or Abraham. I mean, it talked about when he died, and he was, over 100 years old probably, but he still had these senses. Well, Isaac still had good senses, and he thought he was about to die. That's why he wanted to go ahead and give the blessing to his son. But so he must have been, pretty old. I don't know what the Bible told how old he was. Probably so. But he was suspicious, and so he really was sharp in some ways. Well, may God give to you from the dew of the sky and from the richness of the land an abundance of grain and new wine. May peoples serve you and nations bow to you in worship. Be master over your relatives. May your mother's sons bow down and worship to you. Those who curse you will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed. As soon as Isaac had finished his blessing Jacob, and Jacob had left the presence of his father Isaac, his brother Esau arrived from his hunting. Okay, he didn't have long to dread what would happen, because Isaac arrived just shortly after that blessing was given. So, it talked about the dew of the sky, and in my vast knowledge as an older person, I did not know this, but it makes sense. He says the great differences in day and night temperatures in the biblical time in Palestine caused there to be a heavy dew. I just didn't know that. I guess if you stopped and thought about it, and the difference is changing, and we can tell a difference here. And when it changes, we have if the temperature drops really fast, we have some bad weather, and so the difference in the temperatures made the dews to be really heavy. And of course, that was good, because the area of the Holy Land, they do not have a great deal of rain, and so these temperatures at that time, I don't know how it is today, but the temperatures of that time caused it to help vegetation, for there to be a lot of dew, for the dew to be heavy. And so God, it was thought of as a blessing, and of course it was. Everything that happens is a blessing from God, or eventually it can turn into one. So, and of course we know during the wilderness, God sent manna as well as the dew for the people of Israel. So, when he says the richness of the land, he's talking about the fatness of the earth. Everything was very lush, and God sent that. He sent that for the people, when they were following His will. He talks about the olive oil, and olive oil played a very significant part in the lives of the people of that day. You mixed it with flour to make the daily bread, and bread was a big portion of their diet. He says such oil was also important in cosmetics, in perfumes, in medicines, and of the lighting of the lamps. And I mean, we're talking super important, because they didn't go to the wall and reach for the switch and switch on lights. They had to have the lamps, of course, for the lighting at night, and so this oil was used for that. He said it also played a role in sacrifices and offerings. The priest and the kings, when they brought an offering, they had to be anointed with olive oil before they brought that offering, and of course that was synonymous with an honor to God, that they were anointed. So the term, when they talked about olive oil, it was talking about prosperity. The grain and the new wine. Now, we don't know what kind of grain. They didn't identify any specific. It could have been wheat. It could have been corn. It could have been any of the cereal grains. But they didn't talk about it. Of course, that too was very important. The Lord promised to bless His people with the dew and with the grains as an abundance to them if they were obedient to Him. So we know that the people were expected to bring an offering. This was a portion of their gift to God, and they would bring the olive oil, and they would bring the grain, and the offerings of food that went to the temple were what the priests were able to partake of. And so it was important that the people did give those things to God as an offering, as a tithe. So, let's see. Talking about the peoples in verse 29, when it talks about the peoples of the nation, Old Testament, when it talks about peoples, it's identifying a group, and it would be a group larger than a clan, but not as many as a race, and so it was a a medium group of people, and they were together in their fellowships when they had the scripture read to them, and they lived in a common way as a common unit. So now, and I thought it was interesting, he said curse, and I'm glad he let us know this because I wasn't sure about this either. He said when the word curse is used, it's not a foul language. It is to be treated with not good contempt. And so he said this, you're going to be cursed if you do this or if you don't do that. And so it would mean the person's reputation or the person's way of life, and they would have a harder time in that curse. So anyway, there's the blessing. And poor Isaac, he suspects that there's something wrong, but he's soon, Isaac, but he's soon to find out. And, it doesn't talk about he was really, really upset. Esau was really, really upset, and we're going to see how that goes. Okay.
I think he said that he would get vengeance on his brother.
Absolutely. And that hung with Jacob for all those years.
He lived with that, and I guess that's the thing about sin in lives. When we commit a sin, God forgives us of that sin, but sometimes the guilt of that sin can carry on and on and on and on.
Amen.
Just think about Jacob, how long he bore that burden. It was a long time. So today we've seen as believers we must avoid justifying wrong actions. We must be diligent when examining truth claims, and we can trust God to bring his purposes to pass in every situation. And we see that later on even, Joseph made the statement that what they call bad, God used for good. And so God does continue and fulfilling his promises and his will in our lives. And so what happened in this story today, what Jacob and Rebekah did or gained by going through with their plan, on the surface it seemed like they found success by tricking his father and husband into giving Jacob the family blessing. We do see that God did work through this situation to bring about his will. He had already placed affection on Jacob, if you remember back earlier, when he told Rebekah that she was going to have twins and two sons. She said that he said that the older would serve the younger. So he had already favored Jacob even in the womb. He knew what he had in store for Jacob. So what was lost by Rebekah in this situation? She had to have her son to flee. Because Esau said that he was going to take care of this situation. We don't know how. I don't know that he ever said he was going to kill his brother. Yeah, and it might have, if I remember right. But anyway, so she packed Jacob up and sent him off. And it says that she never saw her son again after that moment that he left. And that was the end of Rebekah. We never hear anything else from Rebekah in the Genesis narrative, and we know that Jacob did help to bury Isaac. We know that, and so it's logical to think that he may have seen his father again, maybe before he died, but we don't know that Rebekah ever saw Jacob again. In Genesis chapter 27, as we finish up, it reminds us that God is sovereign over everything. He uses even disobedient acts to advance his plans. His divine promises and plans continued despite the unethical means that Jacob and Rebekah had used to attain their goal. And that's a theme that we see throughout Genesis, as God consistently overcame his people's mistakes to keep his covenant promises on course. They constantly fell away, but he constantly brought them back. And so, many people struggle with that, but when sinful people are involved, God will always need to work around our imperfections. We're not perfect by no means, and we're going to sin and we're going to fall away. But God is going to be there to take the bad and use it for His good. And so, the greatest example of all of this comes in the crucifixion of Jesus. And, he was the only person who never deserved death. He never did anything wrong at all. He never sinned, but he was betrayed by his own disciple. He was beaten by Roman soldiers, and he was crucified after a series of false accusations and unfair trials. His brutal execution is the most horrific act in history today. And it also produced the greatest good that has ever come or that has ever been known. He died on the cross to save us from our sins so that we can spend eternity with Him and be with His Father. And so, Jesus didn't deserve the death, but God used this evil that had been portrayed and placed upon Him to open a door for us as sinners. And so by that we can enter into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ, and it's the only way that we can get to know Him and to get to the Father. And so God often works in ways that we don't understand, doesn't He? But still we must put our faith and our trust in Him because He knows what's best for each one of us. Rebekah and Jacob failed to put their trust in the Lord. They didn't allow Him to provide and to take care of them in this situation, but still God was faithful to them, wasn't He, in the midst of their faithlessness. So just know that today, that even though we do fall away sometimes and we're going to sin, that God is right there with us to help us get over it, get through it, but most of all to take what we've experienced and to use it for His good. So next Sunday we're going to be continuing. We'll be looking at Genesis chapter 28, and we'll be focusing on verses 10 through 22, and we'll see that God is actively involved in the lives of His people. So if you have an opportunity, we suggest that you read Genesis chapter 28 and then be prepared as we come together again next Sunday. So for Teresa Henry, the TV ministry here at First Baptist Church, I'm Jerry Price, hoping you have a great day in the Lord, and we look forward to being with you again next Sunday as we journey into life and work. Thank you for being with us today.